The City of Westland has many departments, boards, and commissions. All of these need to work in tandem with the common goal of making Westland both a destination for visitors as well as a great place to live, work, and play. Hello, I'm Westland Mayor William Wild. I'm joined today by Westland City Council President Jim Hart, and we're pleased to present this series of strategic planning workshops that have been held recently. The programs are facilitated by Scott Patton from Plant Moran, and they're designed and run in such a way as to get everyone involved to start thinking strategically and long-term. By holding workshops such as these, we're able to bring employees, consultants, boards and commission members, and the public at large together to brainstorm ideas to help Westland move forward and be a regional leader in the areas of finance, economic development, and infrastructure.
That's right, Mayor. Through these workshops, we have been able to give first a little history of the subject matter and present an overview of what the role individual departments play in the big picture of our community. Then the director and a consultant outline some of the plans for the future before opening it up for public input. Each of these sessions are the result of countless hours of studying, meetings, phone calls, presentations, and preparation. For those who are not able to participate in or view the workshop live, we're presenting them in this format, so our entire community can have the opportunity to see the short and long-term vision and get excited about all the great things happening here in Westland.
That's exactly right, Council President Hart. There are a lot of great things coming. In today's financial update presentation, our panel talks about the recession of 2008 and their current revenue challenges. Finance Director Steve Smith discusses some current revenue challenges and what is being done to generate additional revenue and cut costs, as well as our outline of a plan for moving forward.
So now let's hand it off to Scott Patton from Plant Moran, who facilitated the workshop session. Good morning, and advance thanks to everybody who's here.
All right, well, thank you, Council President, and thank you to all the council members that are here today as we kind of head into our second day of strategic planning. And I thought our first session on DEI was very well received, and I think it kind of helped us kind of work out the bugs on technology, and it kind of set us up for the next round. So today, Council, you should have received earlier this week the slide deck presentation today, so you should have a chance to kind of take a look at it to get a pretty good understanding of the direction of the meeting today. We've had a lot of time and efforts gone into it. Steve and Dan have been working on this for quite a while, and we appreciate Alicia and her team working on it. We've had several meetings. I know today she's brought in Brian Camelier, who's most of the council members are familiar with Brian, and he's had a lot of different roles with Plant Moran. That he's touched the city in a lot of different ways. So we appreciate him. And then Scott's been doing a great job of kind of putting today's meeting together and kind of tying it into the last one and kind of where we go from here. As you look through the slide deck today, you're going to see we're going to kind of go back in the beginning a little bit. Sometimes they say if you want to know where you're going, you got to know where you came from. And I know that when we talk about finances, that a lot of times you hear Councilman Godbout mention, there was a time when the city only had a $200,000 fund balance, and so to kind of put that into perspective with where we're at today, that's kind of where we're going to circle back to as we talk about the finances, where we're at today, and where we're anticipating going in the future. So we've got all the department heads on here today. I think the only one, MJ will make sure that they're all on here. The only one that may not be on here is Vic. I think he's standing out in front of the City Hall right now, heading up our mass distribution giveaway. Quick happy birthday to Councilman Mike McDermott. Like I said before we started, was that we didn't know what to get you, so we all pitched in a couple bucks, hired Plant Moran, and we're going to do a birthday financial update for you today. Also, Council, if you look at the bottom of your screen, both Council President Hart and Mike Landau had reached out to us yesterday, and there's a new Zoom feature that offers closed captioning. And I know the council president wanted to utilize it for the council meeting Monday. So working with Craig Brown, Craig's got it up today so we can actually kind of test drive it. So it's on the bottom of your screen, and the computer is trying to keep up with us as we talk. And each of you have a spot on the bottom of your screen if you'd like to disable that. So we'll leave that up to you. So with that, I appreciate everybody being here. We've got a lot of ground to cover. The one thing that I would say is that as we go through this, obviously a lot of this is going to be kind of top line stuff. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we know that there's a limited fatigue time on Zoom for everybody. So as we're going through this, Scott's going to stop during all the breaks and offer up opportunity for questions, and there'll be a lot of time at the end for questions. But so that we can get through all the material today, if there's an item that council wants to dig a little bit deeper into, probably the best way to do that, and I've had a chance to talk with council president, is that if there's something that council really wants to do a deeper dive into, we could spin off into a study session on whatever topics those are, so that we can keep our strategic planning sessions moving forward, but we can do study sessions on any topics that you want more information on. So with that, I'm going to step back and I'm going to reintroduce Scott Patton from Plant Moran. As you know, Scott is our moderator for our series and he's doing a great job. Scott, it's all yours.
All right. Thanks so much. Welcome, everybody. Today is kind of the second of 5 different council study sessions related to sort of strategic planning efforts. We had the DEI one in December. Today is finance, and then the future ones will be looking for infrastructure, public safety, and economic development. Each kind of one each month for the next few months, all in preparation of budget season hitting for you in April. What we're going to do today is cover 6 different topic areas, and roughly speaking, for each one of these, it'll be between 20 and 30 minutes, with about half that time for us to present information to you, and then the other half for questions and answers. I am going to be, kind of moving things forward. I'll remind everybody of timing if we get too involved in one particular topic. As the mayor said, we can, look to have a different study session on something. And there's also opportunity if you just have a question on something and you want follow-up individually, we'd be more than happy to reach out for that. The presenters today will be Steve and Dan from the city, as well as Alicia and myself from Plant Moran. And we're kind of go through things handing off to one another throughout. And I want to say that the overall message today isn't one of doom and gloom, and it's not one of everything being rosy either, right? So you're kind of in the middle there of taking the information in and using it to set priorities for the community. And I can say that you're in better situation than a lot of our clients are. So again, not doom and gloom. So the agenda that we have today is to first recap the Great Recession, as Mayor mentioned there. We don't want to dwell on the past, but also knowing where you came from is important to understand in the current situation. After that, we'll talk kind of globally about revenue challenges and fiscal matters, things that are impacting all communities, and with a highlight, of course, to Westland on those. But then there's also things that you have done in order to maintain a balanced budget. So Dan and Steve will be spending some time talking about those. We'll then hopefully take a break midway through and then talk about legacy costs and the trends and opportunities associated with those. And then what revenue and expense options it is that you have available. These will be things that we've seen in other communities, things that we've had discussions that may have come up in previous council meetings as well. So we're just going to highlight those for you, and it won't be a complete list, but hopefully it'll be good to set you down the right path there. And then the last thing is that, we did ask departments, we've asked them to fill out a questionnaire that just included 5 questions related to where they see the future of their operation. So I'll highlight some consistent themes to wrap things up. One other quick note is that the presentation, the last couple of slides are sort of an appendix. We are going to be talking about some, terminology like tax valuation and stuff like that, Headley Amendment. Go back to the last couple of slides if you want some definitions of things, okay? All right, well, let's get going on the Great Recession. So Alicia and Steve will be presenting this part.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Scott, can you, I know we had a version issue there. Can you go right back to the front and make sure what we're seeing on the front is the right? This recap on the Great Recession, 2007 to 2009, this is a version that went out to council yesterday, correct? Because I think at one point it said 7 to 9. Okay, as long as we're good. Let's keep going.
All right.
All right, so this is kind of where we're going to start our look back, if you will. And it's really to give that perspective that the mayor talked about. So reminding ourselves, because certainly this is going to be a refresher, for all, or at least most, on how our local municipalities, including the city of Westland, were impacted by the Great Recession. And really, I'd say where the journey started relative to the road to financial recovery and sustainability. So certainly, as we are all aware, we saw property taxes just plummet at that time, with the recovery to take many years. And so what that meant for the city of Westland was a taxable value reduction of 36%. And of course, that does translate to a direct and significant reduction to the taxable revenue that the city of Westland was able to collect from that point forward. Of course, the recession affected at all levels, right? And so as state and federal governments were also looking to rebalance their budget, there was a trickle-down effect. Some grants got pulled back. State aid was certainly cut as well. And so you were just getting it at all levels, even as you were dealing with what's happening in the local housing market and property tax market altogether. So what did that do? Really, local municipalities across the board saw their savings, their fund balances be completely depleted. And that was really just to maintain and get the bills paid at that time, because you couldn't react quite fast enough to how quickly that reduction hit. Significant adjustments to cost structure followed. And then certainly, discretionary spending halted, whether we're talking about infrastructure, capital, legacy cost funding, and so forth. That's really what you were dealing with. So what did that mean for the city of Westland exactly? Well, the next two slides will show us that, starting with slide 5. All right, so here, this projection was actually prepared by your team in 2010. And so what it's doing is saying, okay, we've got this significant nosedive of our property tax revenue. And if we take that and sort of run it out at the limit in which we know we can increase our tax revenue year over year, which is basically inflation, and we do nothing on the expense side, and we sort of run out what that looks like based on where the spending levels are currently, where are we going to be? And so this is what that looked like. It showed a significant structural deficit year over year, not a small one. We were talking 10 to 12 million excess costs over revenue in each of these years that are presented. So what does that look like in terms of the overall health to the city of Westland if the city did nothing and we let that run out? So that's what we see here on the next slide, on slide 6. Scott? So what it means is by the end of 2015, you would have had a general fund deficit of almost $44 million. When I first saw this slide, it was quite alarming. I mean, our clients were dealing with this across the board, but to see the numbers projected here from what they were 10 years ago, it's certainly quite alarming. And really the only way that the city was going to get to a different result was to revisit that cost structure and get the costs back in line with the new and effectively permanently reset revenue number. So that's really what the city set out to do. I will share that as we were preparing this presentation and I was looking at these slides, I called Brian. One of the reasons we asked him to be on the call today is because he was working with the city at this time and was working with your finance team when these projections were being put together. And I called him and said, Brian, tell me more about this. Tell me more about this time. I kind of wanted to have the context and be able to put myself in the city's shoes at the time. And Brian and I were on a video call, and he looked at me and said, with great emotion, I would add, that was a really, really scary time for the city. Really scary time. So I don't know, Brian, are you on mute, or did you want to share a couple of thoughts? But just the emotion that you shared at that time, I thought might be helpful to those others like me who weren't part of that.
So around this time, we, along with Steve, we were putting together the first 5-year plan for the city. We knew that taxable values were plummeting. We knew that state shared revenue had been under attack since the early 2000s, like 2001. But we didn't have a good look forward. The city at the time was only doing 1-year budgets, no future projections, but where were we going? And when we put this together, the first time we looked at a $45 million deficit in the next 5 years, we were being told, like, this can't be real. And we kept going, Steve and I kept going over the numbers over and over again. Like, no, if you do nothing based on what's happening to property tax revenue and what's happening with state shared revenue, this is where it would go. Now, it's impossible to go 45 million in the hole because you'd run out of cash long before then. You couldn't pay your bills. So you had to do stuff. Now, in the subsequent slides, Steve's going to cover all the things that the city has done over many years in order to avert this situation. But standing in 2010, yes, it was terrifying. What would happen to the city? Where you would end up unless you got really busy and started making some positive changes.
So with that, I think that really sets us up well to, have Steve jump in and talk us through what were those changes. There was a lot of them that had to be made. You want to go ahead and jump in, Steve?
I absolutely will. So if you could move the slide up one. I do remember back during that time when the mayor had directed, finance to prepare the 5-year forecast. And Brian was a big help during that process. A lot of what we're talking about today here brings back a lot of those old memories. But when you look at $45 million deficit, like Brian said, you can't go on like that. You have to try to correct that the best you can. So the next 2 slides will go over some of the major things that we accomplished. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with the unions and personnel costs. So worked with the unions. Since there are 8 contracts within the city, nothing happened quickly, but it did happen over time. So a lot of these things that you see here, we started changing in 2010, and really up through today, a lot of the changes are still in effect, but I'll go through them. The workforce adjustments was probably one of the biggest ones. More than 100 full-time positions, through attrition and early retirement options were eliminated over a 5-year period. On average, at that time, it saved 70 to 80,000 per employee. So that was a big thing that we did. Eliminated longevity pay for all the unions. I think every contract had that in as part of their benefit package. Those were eliminated. That saved $3.8 million over 10 years. It was about a $380,000 a year cost to the city. So we reduced pension costs by requiring employee contributions towards their defined benefit pensions. And then also with the police and fire, we lowered the multiplier for the new hires coming in. So over that, since we began doing that, the city has saved $5 million towards pension contributions. Another big cost for the city was healthcare. So the city implemented a hard cap on the healthcare costs starting in 2012. And what that meant was the city or the employees started contributing towards their healthcare Up to that time, they did not. And then the hard cap, what that means is the cities, as the healthcare costs were going up, the city's costs would be limited, and more costs would be picked up by the employees. That is still in place today. That saved over $5.8 million. After we instituted the hard cap, we also provided 5 different healthcare options to employees. Now, what this did was, if an employee didn't need as much healthcare, he could take a lower plan where his cost or her cost would be lower, and then that would also lower the city's costs. And if you took a better plan, you would actually pay more and have better benefits with that. So a lot of the employees now actually are on the health savings account, where that saves the city a considerable amount of money, and then also the employee as well, because their costs that they have to contribute are a lot less. So another big thing that we did with healthcare was we moved all post-65 retirees to a Medicare Advantage plan. When we did that, it saved $724,000 a year. And just so you know, that did not affect the retirees' benefits whatsoever. So the benefits didn't go down or get lowered because we did this. So that was a big savings to the city at that point. So if you can move one more up. Also talking about the retiree healthcare. So new hires that are coming in are not offered that anymore. So as we talk about our liability legacy costs going forward, that will help limit those. And there are some slides later in the presentation that talk about the OPEB costs, where we're at on that. So that helped something in the future. Another big one is through attrition, we began shifting the building department to a contractual basis. Between fiscal year 2010, 2012, the contract is actually based on a percentage of the revenue collected for permits and inspections. So if there's a downturn in the economy where the permits and inspections are slowing down, then the contract obligations would automatically decrease based on the revenue that we're collecting. So to date, we've saved over $3 million with regards to that. Back in 2013, we contracted out the assessing department. We saved about $130,000 a year on that. So over $1 million since we started doing that. The shared fire chief with the city of Wayne, the city of Wayne contributed, I think right now it's $75,000 a year. So that since 2013, that's over $500,000 there. The shared DPS director with the city of Wayne. Now this one, it shows 150,000 in savings, but the DPS director corrected me. It's about 100,000, and it only went from fiscal year 2013 to 2015. So I just want to make that correction, but there's still some savings with regards to that. Also, one of the big things with the contracts, we did a tiered salary schedule. And what that means is instead of coming in at 100% pay, you may come in at 75% pay. And it'll take you, depending on the contract, it may take 5 to 7 years to get to that 100%. So a lot of those are still in place right now. So obviously those are some of the big ones that we did. I don't know, Mayor, if you had, obviously you were a big part of these changes as well. So I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to these.
You did a really nice job there. And as Brian had said, that it was a pretty scary time. And the way that we got through this was, we brought everybody together kind of like we are here today. And, we had council administration, and we had, we'd reached out to our union leadership, and we did that again today as part of the folks that are listening in today. We have members from the executive boards from our unions, and we just started sharing information, and like Steve said, everybody was kind of under contract at the time. So, and payroll is probably the city's largest, well, it is the city's largest expense. Basically, just to wrap it up, is that, at the time we sat down with all of our unions, and a lot of them are on the call today, and we just worked together, and all those different things you see there. We started at the top, the mayor's office, and we worked our way all the way through to unions. And once the union saw that, they saw the information, they saw that we were willing to be part of the solution, everybody came together. So it was pretty helpful. And I think that some of this information, some of our newer council members and administrators and union members probably wasn't aware of. So that's why we wanted to circle back to it. Back to you, Steve.
Actually, I'll turn it over to Scott for the next graph. If you,
I'll go ahead and jump in and
sorry.
this session, and then I'll turn it over to Scott here in a couple slides. So thank you, Steve, and thank you, Mayor. So what we're doing here for the next couple of slides is we're really showing, we showed you at the onset here that projection of what was forecasted to be the city's financial future before you implemented all those measures that, Steve and the mayor just walked us through. So what did that do? Well, it really, turned around the financial result. It kept the city from having that, sustained structural deficit that we saw in the first slide from 2010. And frankly, it kept you from going over that fiscal cliff that we saw with that projection of a fund balance deficit. So if we could focus, I know there's a lot of information here, but maybe if I could focus everyone on the revenue over under expenditure line item. So that really comes down to what your bottom line is year over year, your kind of your operating result. And the transfers are just internal stuff. So that's all discretionary. So still some tough years there. You were kind of able to manage some of that with fund balance, but eventually you were able to stabilize, and that's effectively where you've stayed since that point in 2015, which again was a big turnaround from that projection. So if we look at slide 11, that really shows what that did to, the overall health of the general fund compared to that original projection. So we went back a little bit further on this one because we did want to show that really low point of fund balance that the city had in 2003. And so just, of course, as you were working on building that up in 2010, we saw the big drop as would have been expected at the time. But since then, you've really worked to rebuild that and maintain it, kind of hovering right around the 9 to 10% level, which is where you're at today, as of, the end of your most recent fiscal year, June 30, 2020. So I guess a few thoughts if we think about, what does that mean? Well, I'd say a few things. One, the city, you really did what you set out to do back in 2010, right? So you rebalanced your budget, you rebuilt your fund balance, and you've managed to sustain it since then, right? So, that's a great accomplishment that we don't want to lose sight of as we think about the financial future of the city. But I would add some other comments. So, 10% is good. It's about where you're at now. That really used to be the metric before 2010 hit. And since that time, the targets as recommended by most in the industry are much higher than 10%. So GFOA would say you ought to be at 16 to 17%. Many others in the industry would say 20% should be your floor. So there's still opportunity to keep building on where you're at today. So I think, as we think ahead, certainly part of the message or the goal is to continue to stay the course, continue to stay on top of things as you've done. But I also think as we look ahead to planning the city's financial future, it's to further build on kind of what you've done to date relative to, long-term fiscal sustainability of the city.
So, Council President, I think we'll pause here and take questions. Unless, Alicia, I think you might have had one other thing to mention there. I apologize.
That's okay. I was just going to share, Scott, that this was going to wrap up kind of the recap of, the recession and the impact and kind of what that's led to. And I just wanted to offer up if anybody else from the finance team or, administration had anything to offer on that kind of retrospective look that I might have missed before we moved on.
Sure. So we'll move into the questions real quick. If I could have the panel view back, makes it easier for me to see the hands. Thank you. So first question, I have a hand raised already from Councilman McDermott.
Thank you, Council President. Through the chair to the administration, obviously we're looking at this from a financial perspective because we're here with Plant Moran today. But when we look at like the reduction in the pension multiplier for our public safety officials, for the unions, for POAM and for the firefighters, have we seen at all that that's impacted positively or negatively one way or the other our competitive balance with other local communities in terms of trying to recruit and attract and maintain the best talent in our fire department and our police department?
I'll take a swing at that, Council McDermott. Obviously it has. When you looked at the financial numbers where the cliff we were about to go over, it required some drastic changes. And when I said we worked with the union at the time, we did work with the union so that everybody that was currently working, we tried to protect them so they could keep whatever benefits they had, whatever we had in place. And what we did is the concessions that we got were, number one was attrition through retirements. But the second thing was new hire tiers. And at the time, the problem we had at the time was trying to keep the city financially solvent. So now working through that, as other communities have, now we're in a struggle to try to hire from a diminishing pool of candidates. And what you're starting to see now is that we're having to make some tweaks, and you saw us make some tweaks in the recent POAM contract so that we can stay competitive. So it's just going to be a balance moving forward. One of the things that we have to be as elected officials cognizant of is that part of the big solution to solving that problem was to offer early retirements to public safety, and that had an effect on the 345 millage, and the members of council at the time had to make a pretty hard decision to raise that number up, and that cost taxpayers money. What the taxpayers got in return were these concessions on new hires and lower multipliers and contributions on healthcare and stuff. So what we have to do now is we have to balance out value for the taxpayers, also competitiveness with police and fire, and so it's not going to be easy, and we're going to compete every day against cities like Canton and Dearborn and Livonia for the best and the brightest, and we just have to try to use innovation and be innovative and try to stay competitive. But it has created some problems, but to this point we've worked through it about the best that we can. But we'll be continuing to talk about that, especially as we go into the public safety side of strategic planning. But it's a great question.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly appreciate that, and appreciate obviously all the work that's been done to get us to this point, to be financially solvent as a community. So appreciate that. Appreciate your administration's work as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there any other questions from the council before we proceed? Okay, I got no hands up, Scott, so we'll give it back to you and your team.
While we're waiting for the slides to come back up, the last slide that was up with the 16 years of fund balance. So 2003, you only had $200,000, and it went up for a few years, and then it came back down in 2010 with the recession, and then it came back up again as you made all those changes that Steve went through. So it is cyclical to some degree, especially in a fully developed and mature community like Westland. You don't have farmland that's going to be converted into new neighborhoods and new tax base. So you have to deal with what you have and reinvent yourself as you go. So it's never a finished product. You've never totally fixed the budget forever. You fixed it for now. And then things change costs change, situations change, and then you have to make further adjustments. So if you take anything away from the history slides, it's that every time we realize that financially we're going to have problems on the horizon, the city has to take action in order to prevent a fiscal cliff from developing. So you come up with new ideas for revenue, you come up with new ideas for cost containments. And I think that's where you're at right now, is that you've had a sustained period of success. You're still in a good spot, but there can be problems coming up. And those are what you have to plan to address and address over time.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, I think we'll move into the next section here that deals with revenue challenges. And this is kind of a broader look at how communities statewide are, the impact as far as what things have happened for those communities. But then we'll also include some information specific to Westland to show how that impacts you. Before I continue, though, I'd like to, we've had some glitches here, so I just want to make sure that you're able to see the screen. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, moving on then. All right, so one of the big things that has happened over time is the loss of statutory revenue sharing. The Michigan Municipal League a few years back put together some information, and you can visit the website that they put together that's called savemycity.org. That's the MI, not MY, in Save My City. And what they did was look at what revenue sharing was happening by community and ask the question of what is it that communities are currently receiving versus what is it that communities would receive sort of under the old set of rules. Because prior to 2013, or prior to 2003, it was pretty consistent as far as what the revenue sharing picture would look like for cities. And so the top line here is kind of what the quotes full payment would have been under the old set of rules. And then the bottom line is what the actuals were. If you want to go to the website and look at any community in Michigan, the MML does have that available for you. But as you can see, over time, the revenue sharing that that Westland has received has decreased pretty dramatically since 2003. And it's now at about a third of what it was in 2003. So that's a huge decline over time. And in addition to that, if you add up that gap between the bottom line and the top line over time, it's a whopping $46 million of a cumulative difference between the two ways of looking at things. So that is quite dramatic. And everybody's saying this most likely is not going to change. It will, depending upon what it is that the state does with their budget coming up here, there will be some modifications. And a little bit later on, we do have some projections as far as what that could look like around assumptions for you. But the overall gap is just, very, very substantial. So the conclusion is that, revenue sharing used to be a dependable resource for the city, very much less so today. So that's big change number one. Big change number two is in property taxes. And so similarly here, we have a couple of things included. The top line, the orange, is the state equalized value, which grows pretty much dependent upon what the markets are, the local markets are. And then the bottom line is taxable value. And taxable value, as you know, can only grow at inflation or 5%, whichever is less. So it's dependent upon what the CPI is for the region. Now, what happened when the Great Recession hit is that, the housing market fell through. So property values decreased to the levels that were appropriate at that point in time. But then as people, we came out of the recession and the figures were there was growth everywhere else. Well, the taxable value could only increase at that CPI. So there is a gap that is growing and is projected to continue to grow for the foreseeable future. And the reason why we chose these dates of 2007 and 2027 is that it looks like even in 2027, you're still going to be a little bit short of what the taxable value was in 2007. So you haven't come quite out of things yet. You've still got a few years left to that, but it is projected to increase at that CPI for the upcoming couple of years here. But it is a very, very big gap that you have. And Steve, I think you had a comment about this.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I think in my opinion anyways, in this whole presentation, this is where those that $45 million deficit that we were talking about earlier, a large portion comes from this slide and the previous slide. But to put it kind of in perspective, when you look at taxable values, today's taxable value, which is the year 2020, you would have to go back to 2002. Our taxable value in 2002 would be what it is today. So you can see almost 18 years later from 2002, we're at that taxable value. So in my book, that's huge. And, when we talked about the Great Recession, the city actually lost taxable value for 6 years straight. And at the end of it, the city lost over 36% of its taxable value. Now, in 2015, it did start inching back up, but like Scott had said, we're limited on what it increases. So for the next 6 years, from 2015 to 2020, the taxable value recouped 15% of the 36% it lost. So not until, and I think Dan and I calculated this out, the graph doesn't show it, but it's not until after year 2030 when we'll be back to the levels we were in 2008. And I think that's just such a big factor when we look at budgets going forward. So, I don't know how much I can say. The graph, obviously shows that, but it doesn't really give the numbers as much. But I think this is a very important graph. So just realize going forward, even though the property values have recovered, the housing market, everyone knows, is on fire. So it's doing great. And you can see by the orange line how it's going up, but the taxable values are lagging. So just wanted to point that out. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Steve. So that's, big change number 2, that's permanent. Big change number 3, well, what's the impact of COVID? And here it's a little bit better picture for you. The state has their consensus revenue conference, which just met the week before last. Their most recent meeting, I should say, was the week before last. And so, the picture that they painted is, it's not rosy, but it's okay. So what they're proposing here is that, and this will be included in the state's budget, but they are saying that, this year there will be a decrease in income statewide by about 3%, and then it's going to increase next year. So roughly speaking, we've still got a couple of years left before we're through things, and then by 2023 it'll be increasing at a rate probably greater than inflation at about 4%. So that's what they're projecting. The impact of COVID on individual income is it'll be back to normal relatively in the next couple of years here. And then the impact that has on the state budget is going to be one there, 2% loss this year. They're looking at things kind of stabilizing a little bit. And then, in 2023, they'll be back to about 3% growth. So overall positive. It is a dip, but relatively temporary one as far as the revenues go. So but what impact does that have on, the communities? The graph below is one that has what the impact has been for jobs for, and this is statewide data that was developed by the folks at U of M. And what it shows is that, COVID hit, there was an immediate loss, a very quick loss of about 1 million jobs statewide. Now, as things normalized a little bit over the course of the last year, things did increase, and that deficit, as far as jobs, about half of it was filled up. But we've still got 500,000 folks statewide who are out of work, and so they have loss of purchasing power, which could impact ability for housing expansion or the like. And in addition to that, these are real people. So that's 500,000 real people, many of whom are in, our Westland residents, and they're just going to have different needs. There are some programs that the state has had that have come through the federal government to help with assistance, of course. But these are real people, and so they're going to have some shifts as far as what their needs are over the next year or so. So that's kind of the impact on income and jobs. What about how is it going to impact your revenues? Well, currently, no forecasted impact on taxable values, because you do have that gap there of between SEV and tax val. And so we're projecting that increase to be 2.25% to 2.5%. And Dan's going to present a little bit later what the 5-year forecast is for the city. Revenue sharing, yep, things have declined by 200,000, but we're now projecting that to increase at a very moderate rate of 2%. Now, we'll see what happens at the state, as they put their budget together, but that's how things look at the moment. There will be some grants, some new grants received, but there are other grants that are going to be negatively impacted. So overall, that grant revenue line is going to be flat for you. And then court fines had a huge hit of from 6.1 million down, and we're expecting that to be slightly lower at 4.9 here coming up. Or I'm sorry, at 4.75 coming up for the upcoming year here. And then other revenue sources, as far as charges for services and licenses and the things like that, seeing slight decreases. So overall, some things, looking okay, and other things going down a bit as well. But mostly things will even out from a revenue side of things. So we'll pause here and see what additional questions it is that council has.
As usual, I'll need my, it's helpful to have my view back. Thank you very much. And we'll ask for any questions from the council. Councilman Andrea Rakowski.
Hi, so, it's staggering, and I know we've talked about it before with the revenue sharing being in such a massive deficit for our city. I mean, $46 million is unfathomable. What can a local government do to advocate? I mean, other than speak to our reps to stand up for us and ask for more of that revenue sharing to be brought to not only our municipality, but all of the municipalities that are really hurting financially, that have planned for this. And then you couple the revenue sharing deficit with the loss of personal property for some of the cities, especially like our neighboring city. That just decimated their budget. So, is there a forecasted trend to be seeing more than just 2% adding each year? Or is there an opinion that you may have on that?
Well, I think that in general, we're seeing things. If you look back at that slide, you'll see the previous few years as being relatively stable. I mean, it'd go up and down just a little bit. I think that's how things are going to likely continue. Your initial question about what to do about it, advocacy is kind of the only real outlet for you. I have heard, there are some discussions from time to time about a statewide type of initiative. around revenue sharing. I have not seen that gaining any legs at all. I don't know if others have some comments that they'd like to add on that topic, though.
I'll jump in on that. So the MML has been advocating the entire time that this cannot continue, as is the Township Association, the Association of Counties. Counties, by the way, were hit even worse than the cities were. But the legislature is the only body that is going to change any of that. And so they're the only ones that you need to convince. It's been going on for so long that, you know, if they didn't come from local government, they may not realize just how much they've taken away from cities and townships. So that's where I would bang the drum, is talking to your local reps and state senators and say, look, you're choking us out. I mean, we have to have that money. And by the way, it's entirely their choice. So you continue to get your constitutional portion of revenue sharing because it's guaranteed in the state constitution. The statutory portion is calculated by law. It's a formula. The state legislature every year chooses whether or not to fund 100% of that law. And for 20 years, they've chosen not to. So they can do it if they want to. It will make their job of balancing the state's budget more difficult.
Thanks, Brian. Next from Councilman McDermott.
Thank you, and thank you to Councilwoman Rakowski for bringing up the revenue sharing. I kind of want to build off of the question about what can we do, and I apologize in advance because I'm walking a tightrope between what can we do as a municipality and getting into personal opinion. One of the things we've seen with the revenue sharing cuts is trying to answer the question of where's the money going to come from to increase statutory revenue sharing. Would it behoove municipalities to get behind future initiatives in things like a graduated income tax where, in the state of Michigan, we're leaving $2 to $4 billion on the table in terms of revenue by having a flat 4.25% income tax where, your average Westland resident pays the same tax rate as someone like a Dan Gilbert or a Mike Illich or, the Illich family. If those initiatives, come about in the future, would it behoove municipalities, Westland and others, to attach in ballot initiative language or something like that, language that says part of that increased revenue would go towards statutory, revenue sharing to help municipalities? Because I think that helps to answer the question of where does the money come from?
Sure. I think that what you're saying there is a form of advocacy around a particular way to address it. And so, yes, if that's, politically the direction that you think would benefit the community best, then as opposed to some other potential directions, then yes, that would be an option for you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the council? All right, I'll just, okay. Peter, did you have something? I'm sorry. Was that something from you, Peter? Okay, very good. The only thing I'll add is, they bring up a good thing about the statutory sharing. I think every council member here has been to at least one MML session where they kind of gone through the statutory revenue sharing, and then we've shown the downward spiral kind of that we've been seeing from municipalities. But there's also some other cool slides that some of our guests and attendees on this should look into. So I would definitely kind of look into the MML documentation on this. And what's interesting is out of all 50 states, Michigan is dead last on the revenue sharing as it has gone through over the years. Matter of fact, we are still under the line. Even the most economically depressed states and areas are still seeing increases in their statutory revenue sharing going back to 2003, and we are still behind. So Michigan's dead last, so go take a look at that. As far as the kind of the graduated tax, I think that's a kind of a little dangerous thing to get into, so we could talk about it, but naturally it's a legislative thing, but I would caution you to look at the population exodus in places like New York and California and see kind of what's happening because of that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Scott. And oh, I'm sorry, we do have a hand raised from Councilman Godbout.
Yeah, thanks. Probably the better thing to be an advocate for is for council to urge our legislature to readdress Headley and Prop A. That is one of the biggest downfalls of the reason that the state continues to balance its budget on the back of the local municipalities is because of their lack of tightening their belts and doing what they should. When the Headley and Prop A dropped the values of the property tax collections, and therefore the revenue coming back not only to the local municipalities, but to the state as well.
Thank you, Jim. Spot on, spot on. So thanks for your adding that. Again, Councilman Godbout's been here for a long time, so always appreciate his perspective. So Scott, I have no other hands raised at this point, so we'll turn it right back over to you.
All right, so the next area here, again, 20 minutes or so, what we're looking at is the measures that have been taken by the city for maintaining a balanced budget. And I think most of the information here will come from Steve and Dan.
Thanks. I'll start off, and I think Steve will then jump back in, and then I'll jump back in after him. When trying to figure out a balanced budget, you can look basically at two different spots. What are the revenue areas that you can increase, and then also what are the expenditures that you can either decrease or reduce or contain. And the city has done both, which we'll go through. So in this first slide, there's various revenue generating measures that have been done. So in 2014, the city recognized a gain of about 13 million resulting from the sale of Taylor Towers. In 15 and 19, the city sold the cell tower leases, which resulted in approximately 700,000 and 850,000 respectively for those two sales. The recently approved millage for the sanitation millage in 2020 is expected to generate approximately 1.75 million in that first year. The library millage that was approved, voter approved in 2012, has generated a significant amount of revenue as well. There's the marijuana licenses, which is relatively new as well. They've generated around 550,000 to date, and then annual amounts about 80,000 to 100,000. And then there's miscellaneous fees that have been updated to bring more in line with the costs associated with them as well. On the next slide, I think Steve's going to go over some cost containment sides, and then I'll go through the forecast after that.
Thanks, Dan. So this is up and above. We had talked already about the the personnel costs that were changed and modified. These ones I'm going to talk about here more wrap around like authorities and joining authorities where you can save some money. So currently the city is part of the Central Wayne County Sanitation Authority. So I know council sees on the vouchers probably every other week bills or invoices that get paid to this is for the cities. When garbage gets picked up at residents' houses, this is where the garbage goes, to the landfill. So these are for the landfill cost, the compost costs, and a small portion of it are administrative costs. So there are 5 cities that belong to the Central Wayne County Sanitation Authority: Dearborn Heights, Garden City, Inkster, and Wayne. We all belong to the authority. This agreement is set to expire in June of 2024. So it might, at that time, that's not that far away, actually, when you talk about having to negotiate with 5 other cities. There may be a chance for some savings on the landfill costs going forward. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that. And I think we mentioned that to council during the budget study sessions last year a little bit. Also, right now, what we pay out of to the Central Wayne County Sanitation Authority is about 1.2 million, both in fiscal year 2020 and 2021. And those costs come out of the sanitation millages that we have. That's just a part of those millages costs. But the other part, what we did recently, and council's aware of this one, the third-party vendor for the priority contract was just instituted or just agreed upon effective January 1st this year. So what that did was it made sure the costs going forward do not exceed the revenue generated from the millages. So that was put into place. Last year, dispatch services, if you remember, we contracted with the city of Dearborn. There's an annual savings of 20% per year of doing it in-house. So that will be continued savings moving forward. We're currently exploring, which I know council's aware of this, the pension bonding. We were approved by the state of Michigan this past week for the bonding to go through. All the other hurdles that we had to do have been met. The bonds are getting ready to be sold, and we expect the proceeds by February 18th, which is a short time away. So that will help one of the pension funds. And I know there's some slides later that talk about the pension funds, and we'll get into more of that then. Retiree healthcare buyouts, as council's aware, 150,000 was put in this year's budget to roll out a program to reduce the outstanding OPEB liability, which stands for other post-employment benefits liabilities. So retiree health care for all city employees. So as we roll that program out, the goal is not only to reduce the current year costs, but also reduce the legacy costs moving forward. This is relatively a new one. The Water Authority, we're looking at with Canton and Livonia, and I'm not sure if it was Northville Township or Plymouth Township, but one of those. That would reduce, that wouldn't help general fund out, but that would help the water fund out, reduce the costs going forward in the water fund. And like I had talked earlier, the landfill contract opportunities with the CWCSA, those are coming up. So if we can renegotiate lower rates, that will just help out the sanitation fund moving forward. So those are some of the highlights there. I'll turn it back over to Dan to go over the next slide.
So what are the results of the various things that we just discussed so far through all the different agenda items? And fund balance, unassigned fund balance at June 30 was 2020 was 5.8 million. That represents a 4.5 million or 333% increase since 2010. Also, our bond rating is maintained at an A+ with S&P. The retiree healthcare liability, through the various things that Steve talked about before and other things, that liability in and of itself has decreased by 123 million since its peak at 279 million. And also the city has also maintained a very low general obligation debt level, which is right now we're about 80th percentile in the state of Michigan. This is the 5-year projection. It's based on the latest Q2 financial report that was submitted to council a few weeks ago. This is presented on a GAAP basis, which stands for generally accepted accounting principles. This projection does include various assumptions, things like inflationary increases for expenditures or known increases on various contracts. It also includes any increases per approved union contracts. It includes a 2 to 2.5% increase on property tax values. These assumptions can be very sensitive though. And depending on if they change up or down, can change this projection significantly in the future as well, just given the dollar amounts that they're tied to. The city, the projection on the bottom there basically shows that the city is maintaining operations and it's slowly building its unrestricted fund balance. You can see through 2026, it's building it to about 10% of expenditures by 2026. Also, one thing to note on this as well, the capital improvement fund is not included in this. So just for planning purposes, once that fund is used up and for all the various capital items that are planned for, either that fund will need to be refunded through general fund dollars, or those capital expenditures will have to come out of here as well. So depending on how that shakes out, just keep that in mind as well. That's all I had on this. I don't know if Steve, you had anything additional to add on that real quick?
Yeah, Dan, I think you made a good point with the capital improvement fund. That was funded originally, as everyone knows, with the Taylor Towers refinancing. Over $13 million was put into that fund. But as that fund is used up, those costs will have to come back into the general fund if there's not another funding source defined for those capital improvements. So I think you make a good point there. And those costs are not included in this 5-year projection. Just to keep that in mind. So thanks.
All right, so that concludes the, this section of the presentation, and Council President would certainly entertain any questions.
All right, first hand comes up with from Pro Tem Londo.
Thanks, President Hart, and thanks everyone for being here. Got a couple questions going back to the CWCSA contract. Steve, I don't know if you mentioned when that one ends again. Is it 2024? The current deal ends?
Yeah, June 30, 2024. Yep.
Okay. And then obviously we'll be renegotiating with them. Are there any other options that are on the table, or is that pretty much our only authority or option for refuge?
No, I think anything's on the table at that point. Whether we stay with the authority or not, that's going to be something that has to be discussed with the other communities. They may want to go their own way too, but there's always savings in numbers. So, the more communities you can get to go in to take your garbage to a certain landfill, the bigger the savings there would be. So.
Gotcha. And then the only other question I got from Dan with the slide you just had up, the general fund balance 5-year projection. You didn't mention COVID. Is that taking effect of the COVID impacts at all? You mentioned a lot of factors of projections. Does that have any COVID impacts, or what do you foresee?
Yeah, I mean, anything that is known at this point has been included.
Okay. Thank you.
Next is Councilman Hertzberg.
Thank you, Council President. Just a couple comments or questions for clarification on starting on slide 18, Steve. Revenue generating measures to date. Under the Taylor Towers, it says there was a sale of Taylor Towers. This was before I was on council. Wasn't that a refinance, and we're still obligated to pay that back?
We are not obligated to pay that back. No. No. That was our money free. That was the city's money based on the Taylor Towers. So that is not something we have to pay back.
Okay. And then just a comment on the water authority. I thought the city got notice that 2 of the other cities were gonna explore doing it on their own. So just so everybody's aware of that. I know 2 council meetings ago, we approved some funds to explore potentially doing a water tower or 2. That'll be an initial cost, I'm sure, before there's any savings realized. And then my last comment is on the unrestricted fund balance as a percent of expenditures. I know we've talked in the past about trying to work towards 12%. I don't know if Plant Moran or anybody can comment. Is there any recommendations put out by the state as a percentage of expenditures that we should be working towards?
So can I take that one real quick?
Yeah, that was my last one. So
okay, so and I'll hand it over to Plant Moran. They can add to it. But I know when we were going through the bonding and talking to the state, and Dan and I were on this conversation, they would actually like to see 20% fund balance.
Oh, wow.
And, 10%, like I think Alicia said earlier, was something, a goal maybe, a decade ago or so. But going forward, the state's looking at, 20%. So that just kind of puts it in perspective. And I know the auditors over time have used the number of 15 to 20%, but I'll pass it over back to you guys to see if you want to comment on that.
I was going to say the same thing, Steve, because we had talked about that as we were planning for this, because you were having those meetings really just a couple of weeks ago with the state and preparing for the bond issue. And I think another thing that came up during your meetings with S&P on the bond rating is them asking sort of like, what is your policy and what's your target? What's your plan? So it could be a good time to really think as an organization about, you know, what do we want our target to be? What should it be? Let's sort of make a collective decision and then work towards that over time so that everyone's on the same page about what the goal is.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we've been working our way up, I think from about 5 or 6% a few years ago. So I just wanted that to be clarified. Thanks.
Mayor?
Thanks, Council President. I'd just like to say one thing on the Water Authority. So the 4 communities that are looking at it are Livonia, Westland, Canton, and Northville Township. The next phase of due diligence for all of us, and City Council just approved our portion of it, is that before we all go in together, we have to kind of look at the numbers to make sure that what we're trying to do collectively that we can't do individually. So what you're seeing is all 4 communities now are doing studies to see if perhaps if they were to build their own tower, if they have enough, I guess, buying power that they could ultimately, do this themselves. I think what you're going to see is probably over the next couple months is that we're going to get our way through that, and we're going to get back to kind of what we already know is that collectively the Northville Township is probably too small to do that themselves. Canton has a change in leadership, so they're going to, they need to do the due diligence, and Westland and Livonia are too. So at this point, none of the 4 communities have said they're not going to do this. We're still exploring it, but it's a big thing, and I think it's proper to do the due diligence and to make sure that what we're trying to do collectively, we couldn't do individually. So I think that's what you're going to see. So Council, we should have our report back from OHM probably within the next month or 2. So we'll keep you posted, but it's something that if we can do it, I think it would really help our water fund, which ultimately would put us in a position to either lower water rates or at least stabilize the increase of water rates moving forward. So we'll keep you posted as that continues. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other comments on this segment? Okay, I see none. Scott, turn it back over to you.
All right, so we have this next section is going to deal with legacy costs and the trends and things related to that. And Alicia is going to take the lead on this part. Alicia.
Thank you, Scott. So some of the trend data I'll move through pretty quickly. I think most of us have seen that data, and Dan and Steve also touched on some of that here in their recent segment. But we thought it'd be helpful to keep in the deck. So Scott, if you could go ahead and we'll start with retiree healthcare on page 23. And so, this is the trend data that was highlighted in the last segment for about a 44% reduction or $123 million reduction. Clearly, it's very significant. But when we're looking at a $156 million number, I think we'd all agree we want to continue to keep chipping away at that and working on reducing it any way the city is able to do so. This here shows the retiree healthcare contributions over the past several years. And so just as a reminder, there is no legal mandate to fund retiree healthcare. So although the actuary does establish a recommended amount that the city could contribute, in order to fully fund it over 30 or so years, it's certainly not required. What I think is important on this slide is that even though the city is not fully contributing the actuary recommended amount, the annual amount that you are spending on retiree healthcare is almost $9 million, still a very significant component of the city's overall budget. So as we've had these conversations about unfunded legacy costs, oftentimes, at least in recent years, we're brought to discussing Public Act 202. So just wanted to give a quick recap about, what that's all about. And so, there's certain metrics that the state was looking at, but a big part of what drove whether or not a community would have to have a corrective action plan was the funding level of the pension or retiree healthcare plan. So for pension, the state was looking at plans that were under 60% funded, and for OPEB, the state was looking at plans that were under 40% funded. And so for the city of Westland, that both the MERS pension plan and your retiree healthcare plan would have fell under those thresholds. So what did that really mean? What it essentially means, the city was then required to put a plan together to show the state and demonstrate for the state how you were going to go about achieving the funding levels that they set forth over a certain period of time. So for pension, again, they're wanting you to get to that 60% mark. They were saying you got to get there in 20 years. For OPEB, it's 40% over 30 years. So the city put those plans together, council approved those plans in 2018, said, here's our plan, we're committed to following it, and then the state then approved that in December of 18. From there, the finance team has and will continue to provide an update to the state year over year on the progress. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about a corrective action plan. It's really the plan that you put together as an organization, and the state bought off on and said, hey, that's a great plan. Everyone's committed to it. It's going to get you there, and you'll kind of meet all the metrics. So on slide 26, this just to stick with the retiree healthcare, this just draws a little deeper on what your plan was as a city. So your plan was to achieve that 40% by 2043, which was about, I think, 24 years from the time when you submitted it. So the state said, hey, you've got 30 years. City of Westland said, no problem, we'll get it done in 24. Part of the plan was to establish irrevocable trust, which did happen in 2019, and then to begin funding that year over year with a minimum amount of $500,000. And that has happened for the 2 fiscal years since the plan was put in place. So this really focuses on funding as a way to get to 40%, but really there's the two ways to get there. One is to, set aside the funds and put more money. The other is to continue to reduce the liability, which also drives up that funding percentage. So the next slide sort of gets us into that, the opportunities to keep reducing that $156 million liability we just looked at. So Steve talked about this a little bit. We know that it was in your budget approved by council, but this is the proposal that the team is going to be putting out there. And I know it'll be discussed further with council. What it really is all about is just offering a cash settlement option to retirees to forego the traditional health care. So the team is looking to offer both lump sum as well as an annual stipend that folks who are interested can choose from. Certainly, this is a complete voluntary program, so it's really just the folks who are interested and want to sign up for this program that will be participating. And the goal is really to both reduce costs, year over year within the city's budget, and then, of course, also to over time reduce the significant legacy costs. So now to shift to pension, we've seen probably some of this trend data before. I would say there's, two really significant things that stand out here to me. One is that between the short period of 2010 and 2018, the required contributions, because unlike OPEB, pension is required as a reminder to be funded year over year, but that contribution level doubled in just 8 years. So from 7 million to 14 million. There's no discretion there. You just got to manage it within your budget as that occurs year over year. The other thing is we've talked a lot about the limitations on revenue. And you think about your largest revenue source being property taxes, how that's really limited to inflation, state sources are coming down. But we can see in some years, the cost for your retirement system funding can jump up at substantial rates. So, an example is between 2014 and 2015, that was about a 23% increase in just 1 year. And then again, that spike we see in 18, that was a 17% increase for just that 1 year. So clearly this really set the stage and lent itself to saying, hey, we've got to do something here, which then brought to the pension bonding that Steve talked about earlier and that we show on the next slide as well. This is just a demonstration of the cost savings opportunities, with or without bond. What do the annual payments look like? We didn't show the full actuary projection, but if you were to look at it through the year 2052, they're projecting a 70 million cost savings. And that's, cost savings cash year-over-year operations, not just on legacy costs. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of moving fast here, Scott, because I know that the council has seen a lot of this data. So we'll move right along. So another thing that was highlighted in terms of some of the results of all the measures the city has put in place is the city's bond rating. So as you're going through and your team's kind of working through the process to get approval for the bonds, going back out and revisiting the city's bond rating is also something that needed to be done. And so as Steve mentioned, the city was able to maintain the A+ rating, which is incredibly important to have a solid rating like that as you're kind of going out into the bond market to sell these pension bonds. And, at the end of the day, it's really telling, potential investors, hey, this is a good investment. It's a low risk investment. We vetted it out. And so I guess maybe just another thing to continue to keep in mind as we're talking about the fiscal health of the city, we're talking about sustainability over time. All these things we're talking about, liquidity, balanced budget, that's all really important for maintaining a strong bond rating. And as you think ahead to other things the city's going to want to get done, infrastructure and other needs over time, some of that may require kind of going out to the debt market again. So this is another thing we're going to want to keep an eye on as we make these decisions and monitor financial metrics for the city.
All right, so that wraps up this section. Council President, any questions from council?
All right, first question comes from Councilwoman Rakowski.
Hi, thank you. Two things. One, if we could get a really brief, broad view of the bonding as up to date, and kind of how long that time frame is and how that impacts the liability, that would be helpful, just to get us caught up. And then additionally, this would be back to the slide with the healthcare buyout. If we could go back to that slide and kind of talk about what that looks like, that would be helpful as well. I heard the word voluntary, which is good for some people, but in previous slides, we also talked about our health care for retirees ending at 65 when they're eligible for Medicare. So if you could expound on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Steve, did you want to jump in or do you want me to start? You're on mute. Steve, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, I'll take the question on the bonds and then I'll turn it back over to you. So the bonding, as council knows, that's coming. I mean, the state approved it last week, which was really the last hurdle that we had to overcome. And also we had to maintain an A rating for us to even issue the bonds, which happened as well. So the bonding is going to wind down here in the next few weeks. We expect to get the proceeds from the bond by February 18th. So the proceeds will go directly into the MERS pension fund. So it'll fund 95% of that liability that was on a previous slide. So going forward, the corrective action plan won't be in place on that particular plan, on the MERS plan. And already on the police and fire pension, that is not in place because they're at 72% funded, I believe. So, that kind of gets you updated on the bonds. Nothing else will be coming to council on the bonds because you guys have approved everything already. I think one was back in November was the final one. And then also, I think in the early September or end of August, council also passed some resolutions as well. So that gets you up to date on the bonding. I think that answers your question. At least I hope it does.
And then on the retiree healthcare plan, so if I could just recap kind of the overall situation, so that the city is self-insured for healthcare claims. So you basically foot the bill as people go to the doctors, go to the hospital, right? So it's an experience-based plan. And so you're kind of taking on the risk that, rather than paying premiums for every person in your plan, will just send us the bill when they go to see a healthcare provider. When somebody becomes Medicare eligible and they move into that program, they sort of come off your self-insurance plan and you effectively pay like a Medicare premium. So it kind of goes back to what we think of like a third-party insurance. And that is on average substantially lower than what your average per claim experience would be, because it could be open-ended. I mean, there's some stop loss, but so that's the difference. I think probably in the past you've heard about somebody kind of becoming eligible and that impacting the cost positively. It's because you're just paying like a supplemental premium for them to participate in the Medicare program at that time.
And then just to follow up with the possible healthcare bio, what does that look like financially for the city? I would imagine that there would be a pretty hefty, I'm going to lack of a better term, startup cost for that.
Did you want to jump in, Mayor?
Yeah, I just saw Mayor's hand up. I think he wants to address that.
Yeah, thank you. Councilwoman, on the first part though, on the bonds, Dan Block has got a timeline that we've been kind of managing off of, and I just saw it got updated last week. Maybe he can forward that to City Council so you guys can kind of see, where we're at and kind of the last couple of steps to this. That way you can kind of, as we keep you updated, you can kind of click along on your timeline. As far as the buyouts, so with the bonding, obviously what we're doing is we're tackling our unfunded pension cost. So with this retiree healthcare buyout concept, what we're doing next is trying to continue to whittle away at our OPEB. Something Oakland County did a long time ago. They started doing this, and then they eventually got their unfunded piece down to a manageable spot. Then they went out to the bond market to close it. So we started off the 150,000. We talked about it during the budget session. The benefit management people, you guys have met Jonathan before. He's been kind of putting together a program, and we just recently, I think, got it vetted through the attorney's office, because there is a little bit of a tax implication to people that take this, but we needed to understand it so that we could educate people as they took it. What my suggestion is, it's only 150,000 to get the thing started, which isn't a lot of money, but I think this is something that we need to schedule a study session and probably bring Jonathan in and kind of talk about what it would look like and kind of who are the people ideally that we want to try to target and what effect it has. Because if we have some success at it, moving forward, we may want to continue to fund this pot of money. But today we were just going to kind of touch on it because we're getting close to coming back to you. But I think this is certainly something that is probably worthy of a study session to look at individually.
Thank you. And I would agree. The study session on that would be fantastic.
All right, Councilwoman, you all set with your questions? Very good. Any other questions on the segment?
She asked what I was going to ask, so thank you.
All right, Scott, we'll turn it back over to you.
All right, good. So the good news, we are ahead of where we thought we were going to be when we, reviewed things initially. So there's two sections left to talk about. This one deals with revenue expense options, and it's kind of a little bit of you've got a lot of information so far. Well, what are the options available to you at this point? And so as far as revenues and things go. So Alicia's going to kick things off, and it'll be she and I sharing this content.
Thank you, Scott. So we thought before we moved forward with, talking through and considering, what are some of the opportunities, what have other communities done, what is even available to a local municipality in terms of opportunities to manage the budget. We'd at least start with saying, well, where are we at today with the property tax structure? And so these are all of the millages that are levied by the city. And, to the extent they have an expiration date, you're seeing that there also. So the rubbage and the library, both because they were voted, do in fact have an expiration date. You're also seeing the original mills that were offered, that were authorized to be levied. And there's been some discussion, Councilman Godbell weighed in about, the Headley rollback. So you're seeing the impacts of that when those rollbacks happen. The millages effectively get permanently reset. And so what you're allowed to levy today is what you are levying, but certainly, significantly reduced in aggregate from where those millages were originally. So in all, the city mills would be at this point just under 20 mills. So with that, Scott, do you want to take us through some of the opportunities?
Sure. So we'll talk first about revenue options for you to think about, and then we'll get into a little bit about expenses as well. But here we're talking about structural type of options. Then we'll talk about one-time things in the next slide. But for this one, you do have the option of doing a Headley override at some point. So as that those rates decline over year due to the Headley rollback, you do have the option of going to the voters to override that. And so those are related to the, what was on the previous side. You also have the option of going to the voters to ask them for a new millage. If there's anything specific that you want want them to consider, that is an option. And then the last one there is the third one there is the special assessments, which also, require their involvement. Now, each one of those options there does, indicate that, hey, look, we do need to go out and do some effort as far as making folks aware of what it is, so that when they choose those options for themselves, it's an informed discussion that they have, or informed decision that they have. Then there's also, opportunities to increase the tax base by development. You are pretty much landlocked, so there isn't much there, and we will have a discussion about economic development in April. So think about this at that time. The city has done an excellent job with, authorities for a couple of different areas there. Well, there are some other services that could fall into that category that might be worth exploring. In addition to that, increasing charges for services, or some services that you have that you might not currently have charges for, but do have an option for, exploring those. And then there's also an income tax option that all cities in Michigan have, and I think 24 have that exercised at this point. Again, that would be another one that would require a vote of the people. And then the last one you heard Dan present earlier about the marijuana business tax fees. Well, so that is something else that that is out there that could have a structural type of opportunity for the city. And so those are kind of the more permanent side. What about the one-time type of things? Well, here there are some assets that the city has of Hawthorne Valley and Ford Road, the previous city hall. And so those could be, sold at one point, and you would generate cash as a result of that. Another thing that we've seen is from our clients is that some of them are rethinking what the overall building footprint is, and looking to reduce that in one way or another. Not sure whether that's going to apply for you folks at all, but it is something else to think about as far as revenues go. In addition to that, here's some expense options. Proposed buyout program for retiree healthcare is something that might be worth considering. Seeking opportunities for service consolidation. We mentioned the authority approach earlier. Here would be similar types of things where you could partner with your communities. Again, a great history of doing that in the city. And then the last one here is, for any sort of service it is that you provide, there are some shifts that are happening about due to technology and due to what people's preferences are related to making things a little bit more online, a little bit more automated where possible. And those can help reduce the cost of doing business as well. So those are things for you to think about. And then Alicia has some additional challenges and constraints as well.
So, before we moved ahead to, covering some of the organizational and departmental goals and trend data, as well as, thinking ahead to the next study sessions, we just wanted to kind of level set a little bit, right? Because there's just a lot on the table. There's a lot to be explored and a lot of options. But, none of them are going to come without challenges or, constraints. There's no magic bullet. There never has been. And so just kind of keeping the reminder out there that as you're making these decisions, I mean, these are all the things that you're going to continue to navigate through as a city. So, an example when I was thinking about this conversation is, we're thinking about balancing the budget as we just looked at, right? We're looking at tax structure and what needs to happen with the tax structure to balance the budget and get done what you want and need to as a city. Well, at the same time, economic development is critically important, as Scott was just talking about. We're going to have a whole session on that, right? And so when we're talking about economic development, we're talking about what do we need to do as a community to entice businesses to want to relocate here? What do we do to entice investors to want to come build and invest in the city? How do we get more people to want to buy their homes and raise their families here, right? And so when we're having those conversations, we're sometimes also talking about the tax structure and is it competitive enough to entice those folks to kind of want to come do business and live in the city of Westland. It's not either or. Both of those conversations have to be happening and they're both critical, but the decision points around how the tax structure, the property tax structure in particular should look are going to be very different depending on which lens you're viewing, right? So continuing to work through how those things all come together when at times some of the decision points might feel conflicting. So that's really kind of the message that we wanted to leave you. And if I guess if I tried to, if I wanted to think of this maybe in a positive or opportunistic way, I think it's that, this really just demonstrates that as a city that you're really going to have to continue to be creative, continue to stretch your thinking around how do we get these things done. You've always done that. I mean, I think that the slide deck has shown that, but that's going to have to be the course that you continue to take to figure out how to move past these things and still get the business of the city done into the future and in a way that sets you up to be fiscally sustainable long term. All right, Scott, back to you.
Well, I think that concludes this particular section. So, Council President, back to you, I suppose.
Yep. So you guys have any questions on this segment? Councilman Hertzberg.
Thank you, President Hart. In regards to the one-time revenue options, we have city assets here. If we could, I asked for it before a couple of months ago, I didn't get it. If we can get a list of all the city-owned properties so that council could take a look at that and kind of get a better idea of the outlook, I'd appreciate that. Another thing, it was mentioned, I think last year during the budget sessions about a potential public safety millage. I don't see that listed anywhere in here. If the administration has any comments, if we're still thinking about that, I'd appreciate that. And then I got some more comments. I'll save it for the end.
Any other input on that or any other questions from the council? Councilwoman Rakowski.
Hi, so I think one of the slides talked about the footprint, or maybe Scott had made mention of the footprint. So that to me means building up as opposed to building wide with new developments. Is that what you were driving at?
Yeah, so some of our clients are looking at, and it tends to be the larger ones, by the way, but if you have a large number of buildings within your footprint, are there opportunities to consolidate the services within? And that has a couple of impacts. One of which is on the cost side, it's less to maintain, but then you do free up those facilities for sale. Now, again, I don't think that'll be an option for at least not in the short term, but it is worth discussing and making sure that it's not, because it's your choice about what the overall footprint looks like.
Okay, so you're talking about our owned assets and consolidating our buildings to free up more space, possibly.
Correct. And
What you're, instead of developing in the economy, enticing multiple story buildings. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other, is there any other input or questions on this segment?
Council President Hart, could I just quickly go back to Council Member Hertzberg's comment or question? I just want to address it about the millages.
Absolutely.
So Councilman Hertzberg, if you went to slide 33, we had just noted consider votal approval for new millages. We just listed a couple of examples. So roads, capital improvement, future debt. We could have put another comma and said public safety. So it would really be in that bullet. I think everything will be on the table when you all discuss this further as a group.
All right. Any other comments? Seeing none, Scott, take us forward.
All right, so this is the last section, and we are doing very well on time, so chance we may end up finishing earlier than what we had projected, depending upon what the comments are and questions are at the end. But this section deals with things that are going on in departments. Now, we did send a survey out, a questionnaire out to your department heads and asked them the question, 5 different questions. And it dealt with things like, what trends do you see? What changes have happened with service expectations? Are there mandates that are being considered at a statewide level that might impact your operations? Then also, COVID did change quite a bit around what it is that people expect of services. Some of those are going to, continue on even, when the pandemic is lifted at some point in the future. And so we asked them, okay, what is it that what are the changes that might be that you've had to deal with over the last year, but you probably think might be worth continuing into the future. So again, we asked it of all department heads, and I did look at each questionnaire, and I cherry picked some of the responses, looked for some consistent themes. And so this first slide here, it just deals with those themes that showed up in a few different questionnaire responses from folks. So the first one there, in-person sensitivities to communicable disease are going to change expectations around contactless services. So in general, people are going to be less likely to want to come into City Hall to do business than was the case before. And when they do come in, they're going to have different expectations around what that experience might look like. So this might include things like additional barriers or sanitizers, those sorts of things that we've all grown to be accustomed to over the last year or so. But it may continue into the future as well. And then similar to that, providing services through portals or online demands are likely to increase. Again, less likely for people to want to come into City Hall and have direct interaction around services. Before, that demand was around strictly convenience. Now that demand is around convenience as well as concerns, health concerns. So those are, something that is real. Now, the challenge for the city is that not everybody in your community is going to be positioned to take advantage of those remote services. But to the extent that you are able to provide those things remotely, a lot of people are going to demand that. So there might be, opportunities for services to be offered via computer at at City Hall, where those workstations might be sanitized, as an example. And this is something that other communities have talked about as well. Some things, and this came up a few different times, but I'll speak specifically about a building inspection here. Those services the procedures associated with them may remain post-pandemic. We have, again, for other jurisdictions, seen where they are looking to have things like pictures or online delivery of videos and things for building inspection, where the inspector doesn't need to go into the building for some of those simpler things. Now, the more complicated type of inspections, absolutely a site visit would still be required. But we are seeing that as being something that that some jurisdictions are moving toward. Data visualization, we've had quite a few graphs in here that are becoming the standard. In fact, a lot of the things that we have included in here might be less than the standard that folks are expecting on these days. So we're seeing that particularly around things like geographic information and how that's portrayed. And a demand to see things in mapping software is increasing. And then there showed up a couple of times where, you know what, if there are, the standards that are being advanced at a federal level right now, if they do gain traction and support and are ultimately pass where minimum wage, that the minimum wage does increase, well, that's going to have impacts for you as far as prices for services that you offer and the fees associated with them. So that is something to keep in mind as you put together next year's budget. Service expectations are going to, change, but we need to make sure that those things are codified within the ordinances that the city has. And then, the last bullet here is that, we open and close and, provide things remotely like this. Well, that type of thing is going to continue through 2021 until, at some point we will be back to some semblance of normalcy. But in the same way that, in November, there were the changes around restaurant attendees, and going remote for services, that's likely to change as well, or continue at least in the upcoming months here. So those were the things that department had said, organization wide. Now there were some department specific trends as well, and so I'll go over these. And the department heads are, on the call and can address any specific questions. But I'll share these. And again, I cherry picked them, so I didn't include everything that department heads had. But things that I thought might be of interest for council here. So the first one there is the community diversion programs for 17-year-olds. Well, with the raising of the age from 17 up to 18, the 17-year-olds are going to have more access to those diversion programs. Couple of folks did say, we are noticing trends about, self-medication and mental health and isolation. So COVID's had two things. One's a health, health concerns, but as people control those health concerns, they have increased isolation, and that has caused an increase around self-medication and mental health challenges as well. So that may continue. Commercial real estate is something that could be impacted negatively for the in the short term here, as people are working from home. A lot of folks do like that environment, and some organizations are saying, "Yep, you know what? When things go back to normal, we might continue that as well." And that'll just have an impact on what rates are for office type of settings. Pathogen mitigation in city facilities, another department-specific trend. And then something that showed up in Public Works, and maybe we'll talk about this in the infrastructure discussion next month. But people are more able to make requests of information today than has been the case in the past. And that means that your department's being challenged in being able to meet those expectations in the same way, because they're becoming a little bit more reactive rather than proactive in some cases for things. So managing that expectation is going to be an issue. And lead and copper rules are also something that will probably come up in the session next month around infrastructure, but those are increasing costs as well. So those were department-specific trends, and then goals here. I just wanted to speak to a couple of them here. Economic development is one. Again, we'll have a session in that in April. But having stronger support for new businesses and really becoming a redevelopment ready community. There's certification that the state has that your economic development director will share more details about that in that session. Fire department, there is a trend here of telemedicine, which involves your paramedics and EMT folks providing services and having the hospital or whatever phone in for a portion of that, but more on-site type of care pre and during transport as well. And then they did want to highlight that some the SAFER grants are set to expire in 2023. And there are several positions that are tied to that, and retaining those is going to be a goal of the fire department. And then planning, comprehensive update of zoning ordinances is something that they shared about a specific goal that they have as well. And again, could answer those questions if you had wanted to get into some specifics with them. Excuse me. So those were the things that we found from the survey. Or the questionnaire that we sent out, and again, there might be some others, but did want to open it up for any questions that council might have, either of us or of the departments themselves.
Thanks, Scott. Any other questions from the council on this? Any input? Councilman Herzberg.
Will this be the end of the study session or last chance for any discussion, or was this specific to the section?
I'd recommend handle some questions on this section specifically, and then about the study session in general.
Okay, I'll wait just a minute. Thanks.
Okay.
Council President, do you agree with that, or?
I agree with that. So what we'll do is we'll go through this segment, then we'll get input on the whole session, then open up to comments from the public after that. So then close. Next, I have Councilwoman Rakowski.
Hey, it's me again. Sorry, I like getting as much information as I can. In regards to telemedicine with our fire department and EMS, now I know that was something a lot of different departments throughout the nation were trying to utilize during the pandemic, and certainly that was for the welfare of those men and women, both on the receiving side of care, but also those administering the care. But I do know that, like, in our particular county, Wayne County doesn't allow us to do that. Has there been more discussion as far as making that a reality for our departments? I know a lot of that comes down through HEMS, and I just didn't know if that was like a recommendation from the department, the county, or if we're throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. So if you could just expound a little bit more on that, that would be great.
So real quick response, we do have in a couple of months a discussion on public safety in general. So we'll make sure to hit on that during that time. But I can say it is a trend. It is something that fire departments have been moving toward in nationwide, really. How it impacts Wayne County specifically, I can't speak to, but I know your fire chief will be able to.
Councilwoman Rakowski, the other thing I would just mention, in addition to kind of the trend that we're seeing, is that on the provider side, because of what's happened with the pandemic and how effective this has been, providers are now opening the door to say, well, wait a minute, maybe we should keep funding these beyond the pandemic because it's working and it's a lot cheaper and it's effective and it's quick and it's convenient. So there's a lot of discussion on the provider and insurance side of what this is going to look like for being able to pay for this going forward in a way that it was not funded previously.
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that. I know we utilize telemed with our insurance, but like you had mentioned before, for everything that we do introduce, there's a cost associated, right? So there would be an infrastructure cost on the side of being able to provide that service as well. So I'll wait for our public safety talks and we can dig in deeper on that. you know, my colleagues know I'm the wife of a firefighter. So obviously those are some of the things that stick out. I have, you know, my life experience is just a little bit different in that arena. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. Any other comments on this segment? All right, I see no hands. Scott, is this probably the appropriate time now? You're moving to overall comments?
Sure, I think so.
All right, I'll just go by council member in order, so just give them the floor. Then I'll go to the mayor, and then after that, we'll open it up to comments from the public. So I'll just start. She just spoke, so I'll give her a break for a minute. I'll start with Councilman Hersberg.
Sure. Just thanks everybody for being here. Thanks Plant Moran and the finance team for getting everything together for the presentation. You know, it was a good recap. You know, I was under the impression we were going to have a visioning session where council would kind of have an open dialogue with what priorities we wanted to see in the budget. But there has been some mention of these future study sessions, Council President. So when your comments come up, if you could just, I know they mentioned economic development in April. If you could just give council an idea on what to expect in these series of study sessions, that way I can know what to plan for. Would be very helpful. On the last slides, we talked about the planning department. I think planning is doing a really, really great job, really aggressive. Mo's doing an awesome job. We'll talk about economic development a little bit, and I'll be looking forward to that study session. You know, economic development, our team can do the best that they can, but, you know, without support from other departments, there's not much they can do. Specifically, we need to maintain we need to improve our police response time and really the overall presence of police. That is going to assist in economic development as well as ordinance enforcement, which I still feel we're doing a really, really poor job of. It seems that our ordinance officers are just reacting to complaints that come in through the system. You know, if you go drive up and down any one of these roads by City Hall here, you're going to see that people don't shovel their sidewalks. They're leaving trash out there, and you know, you got leases and strip malls that are far cheaper in neighboring cities, and they're better maintained. So we got to get our act together all around to support economic development, and I'll be looking forward to that study session. And then just a last comment on these series of study sessions. We did talk about reviewing some of the redundant ordinances that need to be updated. I'm not sure if you have plans for a study session for that. I know right now it's illegal to eat fast food in a fast food parking lot, you know, based on city ordinance. So we've got a lot of old ones that need cleanup. And I guess the only question I would have through the chair to finance, I know we're making some changes with the fire chief's position. Do we have an estimate about how much additional in a budget amendment we'll have to do to cover that? Is it about 75,000 or? And I'll end with that. So thanks everybody.
So I guess.
Sorry, Steve, I lost my keyboards and I'm using mouse only. So Steve,
Okay.
Can you address that?
So to answer that question on the fire chief, that's a budgeted position in the budget. So if one person moves into the fire chief's position, that's already been budgeted. I'm not sure if you're talking about.
Well, Wayne is covering half of the salary, I thought.
No, 75,000. So right now we've got 7 months of the year would have gone by. Right. I'm just saying this, I'm not for sure about the amount, but it'd likely be 5 months that we would have to refund back.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, thank you. We move into Councilman Godbout. Did you have any comments?
No, just thanks everybody for taking the time, putting all the material together. It was very well done. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Councilman McDermott.
Well, good afternoon. And first off, I want to thank Scott and Brian and Alicia from Plant Moran for joining us again here today. Very informative presentation. Thank you to the mayor and the administration for having all the department heads on and putting this on and allowing us to have this visioning session. So really appreciate that. A couple of things here, and I think this is probably better reserved for our public safety session, but I want to, be able to dive in more to the idea of, a public safety millage. What would that look like? What would a, potential time frame be? How much revenue could the city potentially, look to raise from that? What would the funding sources of that go towards? I think there's been a big push from a number of people on council, and certainly from, I think, some people within the departments in regards to staffing levels for public safety. So that's something that maybe we can get into in the public safety presentation portion of this, the visioning session for that. Also getting into the purchase of new fire trucks, EMS vehicles, and police vehicles, making sure that we're on a good time schedule for being able to replace some of our older vehicles that are in the fleet. And again, I'll kind of save comments and questions on that for the public safety session as well. And then just a couple of other quick points. I'm glad that we really focused on revenue sharing again, because I think it deserves all the attention it gets and then some. Increasing statutory revenue sharing or pushing the state to do that, I think, is something that's critically important. And whether we're doing it, as Councilman Gabbout mentioned, with Headley and Prop A, Proposal A changes, I think is going to be critically important, or looking at new funding sources to be able to increase statutory revenue sharing, I think, is something that we all as a council, working with our partners in MML, working with other, county and local governments, I think is going to be critically important into the future, because, unfortunately, what we've seen from this presentation is that, property values are still leveling out from where we were at 2007 and pre-recession levels. So it's presented a revenue challenge for not only the city of Westland, but for other communities as well. So I think the more that we can shine a light and focus on state shared revenue and, how the state has really balanced their budget on the backs of local communities like Westland is critically important. And again, I'll end by saying thank you to everybody for joining us here today. Thank you to Plant Moran and also to the administration for putting this session on. And I look forward to having more and increased dialogue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Rakowski.
Thank you. Yes, and I'd like to also thank Scott and Brian and Alicia and of course Dan and Steve for putting this together, and the administration for making it possible. I think it's a very good foundation session so that we can, in the future sessions, really dig into what we have to work with versus what we would like or need. We got to know where we stand in order to realize those or make, the plans. One of the things that I keep seeing and is, a lot of it's a lot of the ideas fall back on the residents, and that's not what I want to see at all. Putting more of the tax burden on our residents when we're already one of the highest property taxed cities locally is just heartbreaking. There's not really a lot more to say about that. So I would like for us to try to be as creative as possible and try to mitigate as much taxation that's going to be thrown at or used as options for the budget. And that just goes back to that revenue sharing, as Council Member McDermott said. I think we really have to be advocating strongly, using the MML resources. When you have 46 million of your dollars being held up, we all saw the graphs, right? So what could we do with 4.6 million, 1 million? That could certainly change the prospects of a lot of what we can do, and without putting that burden directly on our residents. I think it's important. We saw the redevelopment ready cities proposal or that our economic developer is working on. Aubrey's doing a fantastic job. It's a lot of work, and we all need to be ready to jump in and supply her with whatever support that she needs, because really that's it's a paradox, right? So there's like a lack of desire for commercial space, but we want commercial businesses to come in. So we have to be ready to make the city as business ready as we possibly can, because that's one of our other greatest revenue sources. So I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate the information, the foundation, the ideas. I'm looking forward to digging in deeper on some of these areas, and finding ways to make, some of these service levels a reality. And I know that's not going to be a 1-year thing. It's going to be a multi-year plan that we have to do. And I would also want to inquire about trying to utilize not just the 5-year forecast, but possibly going into a multi-year budget and seeing if we can't get some of those services to the levels that we would like, utilizing that. So again, thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time, and I look forward to our future planning sessions.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Pro Tem Londo.
Thanks, President Hart. I actually don't have a lot tonight. Well, I said tonight, this afternoon, I should say. Thank you, everyone. Alicia, Brian, Scott. Scott, you did a great job facilitating again. Mayor, thank you to you and your team. Dan, Steve, everybody that's involved with the finance department. MJ, you guys did a fantastic job putting this together. Looked it over pretty well. Asked a few questions on sidebar, but I thought it was great information. And like Councilwoman Rakowski said, it was really good to lay the foundation kind of for future sessions on where we're at. It's easy for all of us to dream big and say we want this, we want that, but we got to kind of know where we're at. But I do want to hear everyone's ideas. I got some ideas as well. But I would also echo the comments as well. I don't want to see any new taxes anytime soon for our residents as well. There was talk, there's a few times people have talked about, public safety millage. I think one of our councilwomen mentioned that a few years ago. That never materialized. Councilman Herzberg mentioned that it was mentioned at the budget session. I think the mayor was saying it's been mentioned before, referring to that case. As far as I know, I don't believe the administration's went through any research on that at all. So what else do I got here? I just got a few follow-ups. I know Scott probably took good notes, but Council President, we want to schedule a study session on retiree healthcare, kind of what that looks like. And then during the public safety session, we want to dive a little deeper into, talk a little more about the telemedicine, and also going back to the millage, what would that look like? And then hopefully have everyone's buy-in if it's something we're going to pursue. I think that's all I really got. I'm just looking forward to, like I said, looking forward to all these sessions. Thanks for everyone for being here, and have a great day.
Thank you, Council President Pro Tem. So as with my colleagues, I'll thank Plant Moran and Dan and Steve and the administration for all your work and spending your Saturday morning with us instead of your families or whatever else you're doing. So it is appreciated. And also thank you, my colleagues, as well, for making the time and spending some time here listening to what all the great information gets put out. So thank you. We kind of hear this about once a year during our budget session, especially when we go through this finance, but it's a little more anecdotal, kind of we touch on some of these things. So it was nice to have not only really be able to look at everything again, but have all that historical context and documentation, and also be able to have a nice, neat place to keep it. A lot of times when we look at these graphs, it's kind of unique to that year's budget and trending. This one, this piece and this information lives and stands on its own. And I think it's something that can be referenced back to a number of times. So it'd be helpful for the council to have that, not only to keep you kind of abreast, but also to remind you when you start looking at and kind of coming up with some creative ideas on your own about where we were, how we got where we were, the things that happened, and how we got out of those situations, and kind of we're moving forward. A historical context, all packaged in a nice piece of literature here, and presentation is going to be really helpful. So thank you for all the work, and thank you for the colleagues for showing up. For the breakout session, so I've heard a few, this, that. Gets hard writing them all down and keeping them clean on my scratch paper here. So what we want to do to be helpful is send me an email if you have items you want to have a breakout on. So if there's like a deep dive or specific items you want to cover during our already, established visioning sessions coming out or study sessions coming out, that's one. If there's a breakout you want on something else, send me that too, so we can kind of work with that. I can work with Scott and I can work with the mayor so that we kind of make sure that we're addressing those topics, or at least finding a way to carve out and do some advanced research and work so that there's material that's available so that we can talk about these. What I don't want to do is throw a study session together and really didn't have the time to do any research and be able to address the questions, right? So I think that's important. That's going to be helpful for you as well as the administration. So send me those. I'll compile all those requests together and requests for information. We'll work with the mayor and we'll work with the team and for Scott and everybody else and trying to figure out how to make that work for everybody. Again, thanks for all the information. I think the administration's been doing a really good job of managing and controlling expenses over the years, right? So expense is something we've really been able to control internally. And you've seen that, right? Reduction in force, kind of getting smarter with kind of some of the contracts that we've had and being really creative. So I think, well, expenses are never perfect. I think they're really working on it. The revenue part is something, you know, we really need to look at. And our two greatest paths to real revenue are going to be new development, right? That's something we're going to work on. They're being able to get new roof starts, you know, things that haven't been capped, brand new revenue sources for the city are going to be important. Maintaining and increasing our population, housing areas. I mean, there's some vacant school property, and while we don't own the school property, right? I think communicating with the school district and helping them understand that, you know, vacant property costs them as a liability. You know, developed property gets it off their books, adds to our revenue, and adds to theirs as well. So there's a mutual gain there for developing housing on that property. So maybe the administration can work with the school district and get something going there. Hopefully they'll be agreeable to it. The other thing is, quite frankly, it's a state shared revenue. We've talked about it. The city council administration, you know, we're under the microscope from the residents, you know, managing the money effectively. It's our job to provide services, right? So anybody that kind of says often that a government needs to run like a business, really that's not entirely true. A business is designed to generate revenue, and they do that providing services at a profit. Municipal governments are here to provide services, and we use taxes to be able to do that. There's no profit stream. Just it's our job to do that effectively with the money we have, right? So state shared revenue being pulled away from us has reduced our ability to do it in a grand scale. And quite frankly, the state is taking none of the blame for it, and they're reaping all the rewards and letting us hold the badge and the criticism for it. So I think there's a great onus on our legislature, and we need to come together and make it their job to fix that problem. We can work on development, but it's their job. And some of the small pet projects that they're working on really pale in comparison to some of the more important things we need to get done, like fixing this. Because honestly, our residents are going to be mad at us because we're not able to deliver the services that they want. But when we go to say that Lansing stole 4.6 million from us, what are we going to say? You know, they stole it from us. And the first thing I do is come back to us and say, well, what are you doing about it? Right. So I think we all need to get on the same page and address that. So I kind of address those things. You know, development's the big one. Our two paths to revenue are development, new development, and state shared revenue. And the one we really only have control of is development. So working with Aubrey to make sure that we are marketing ourselves. And I know she's doing a great job. And I think there's also a short path on working on the school properties. So I appreciate everybody coming out. Mayor, you got to hear the council first this time before your closing comments, and I thought that was important. So I'm going to turn everything over to you. You've kind of heard what the council, kind of their thoughts are. So I'd like to turn it to you, get your closing thoughts before we move to comments from the public. So Mayor.
Thank you, Council President. So Council, kind of what we were trying to do here is really give you a good kind of overall understanding of the city's finances, and for the newer folks was to kind of take you back a little bit to kind of show you some of the things that we've done. So as we make decisions moving forward, we make sure that we keep our strategies aligned. The next couple study sessions are going to be addressing things that we're going to want to fix, that we're going to want to fund. And, you know, public safety is obviously something that's top of mind to all of us. And we're going to look at infrastructure, and we have a lot of needs in both of those. We'll be looking at facilities and equipment and things that are going to cost us money. So I wanted everybody to get a pretty good understanding on the financial situation, so that as we get into those things that we know we need to do, we can start to strategize how we fund them. So, you know, there was talk about a public safety millage, and to me, that's the funding piece. What we have to do is, as we get in public safety, we have to identify what the problem is and what we're trying to accomplish lined up with our strategic plans. Then we figure out the funding source for it. So then we weigh it against other priorities like infrastructure and paying down our OPEB debt and other type of things. So today's just the first step in this process. I appreciate that 6 of the council members were here. I did not see Councilwoman Green on today's session. It does look like all the department heads were on today too, except for Vic, which we talked about. There was talk, and Mr. Rakowski mentioned RRC. Aubrey will be giving an update on RRC at the economic development piece. So all in all, I think it was a good session. Councilman Herzberg, you mentioned ordinances and lack of enforcement. So our neighborhood services may have took that as a little bit of a cheap shot today. So what I would suggest is perhaps maybe you schedule some time with them. Your comments about you can go up and down any street and find problems. Perhaps if you meet with them with more specific issues, collectively, we can work together to try to address some of those. So with that said, Council President, we appreciate everybody being here today, and we'll answer any questions from the audience that we can.
All right, Mayor. At this time, if you're in the audience and you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and use the raised hand feature. First I have is Rich K. Rich K, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Council President.
Yep.
On behalf of the members of the Lieutenants and Sergeants Association, we've seen this before in 2010, and working with the mayor's office, the administration, and city council. Obviously, we know there are always challenges ahead, and we recognize the fact that this is obviously a fluid situation, and we're always willing to come to the table and work with the administration and work with council on resolving these, because we all have a long-term and short-term need to see the city sustained. So I'll keep it short at we look forward to working with all bodies involved in this in the future.
Thanks, Rich. Appreciate it. All right, next we have Richard Graham. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you. Thank you for the time and everybody spent. I didn't catch everything, but I guess a few comments. First, hopefully this video will be placed online for the residents that want to be involved, wanted to be active, but frankly couldn't join for 3 hours, or I'm sorry, 2.5 hours. It'd be great to have that public so people can watch and understand and learn about their government. Be more active. Be more involved and really care about the community. A good way is to have more residents involved so they can listen and hear of the comments, especially when there's comments about millages, about tax increases, especially for public safety, especially as they've been decimated over the last 10 years. The union workforce has been decimated, reduced to significant amounts, and frankly, I know many council people have talked about adding, or at least a few have talked about adding police officers and firefighters full-time, not grants. And that just doesn't happen. The Wild administration doesn't add to public safety. And frankly, part of the blame is the unions. The unions go along with this. They endorse candidates that don't add to police and safety. They don't hold the administration accountable. So those things just don't happen. And the unions, frankly, bear some of that responsibility by the large amount of money that they pour in to the candidates of their choosing. So interesting, the comments by Council President Hart. Agree wholeheartedly with there needs to be development. There needs to be additional tax and revenue streams. However, those things just haven't happened in the last 10 years. It's just been, very poor. What was a growing Southeast Michigan, and we just didn't partake in that. And also troubling that, Mayor Wild continues to go after Councilman Herzberg, using the words of cheap shot. those should not be called for. And frankly, Council President Hart should really reprimand the mayor for going after a council person, in this type of forum. It's a cheap shot of the mayor to do that. The neighborhood services do, an average job at best. They're placed by people that have been council people, been part of that Team Wild movement, and they do an average job at best. So unfortunately, Mayor Wild continues to want to do cheap shots at council people, but that's just the way he is. Obviously, he shows it and demonstrates that. With that, thank you again. Hopefully, this video will be online for residents to see, become involved, and to understand what's going on in their community. Thank you, and have a good rest of the weekend.
Thank you. Are there any comment from the public? Just use the raise hand feature in your Zoom app. And I think if you dialed in, I believe it's a *6. Okay, last call. All right. Going back, we'll close citizens' comments. I don't think we had anything else. With that, I think we're ready to close. Mayor, did you have any final comments or any final word? All right, very good. Again, thank you all for attending today. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to give you back your day just after 12:02 to 12:03, and we'll see you all soon, I'm sure.